Today's video is being brought to you with help from G Fuel. If you too are interested in getting your hands on some, either to try it out and see if it's right for you or to resupply your favorite flavor and are looking for a bit of a discount, please use the code TheDsIEGE and get 20% off your next purchase, while at the same time supporting this channel and helping me continue to create the content you've all come to enjoy. I'll leave a link in the description below if you're interested, and thank you in advance for any who choose to purchase using my code. I very much appreciate your support. Without further ado, on to the featured presentation.
The system shall change. No more clutching at sunk costs, imposed ideals, hand-me-down hopes. No, we are better than that. Corpus shall know a violent restructuring, but with time enough to face the impending threat from Tau with renewed and absolute vigor. Or not. Perhaps the rot is too deep. Perhaps the father should abandon his children. Perhaps it is time for a new philosophy. Life's just a bargain like any other. Yours is no different. Would you like a seat at my new table? Perhaps with your masked friends alongside? The business, was it? A curious name. And Utico, of course. All people who know what they want. I know what they want. But what about you? Tell me, friend. What is it you desire?
Hey all, Siege here, and today I want to get into what appears to be, more and more, the development of a major antagonist. One who, by all rights, initially seemed to be what would have amounted to a substantial ally in the greater narrative. But his actions within Operation Belly of the Beast's narrative, in conjunction with his previous activity, is slowly peeling back layers to reveal an increasingly plausible and disturbing union that by rights could have quite easily been prevented. Namely that Parvos Granum, the once trapped and exiled leader and founder of the Corpus, has begun what is becoming an increasingly origin-wide search for all things ancient Orichan. And with this most recent assault within the very depths of Uranus, it doesn't appear his intentions are noble. But how exactly did we get here? After all, Granum was safely trapped within a pocket of the void, seemingly constructed by his commissioned protector, Protea. Unfortunately, it would appear, no good deed goes unpunished. One of the ideas we tend not to talk about with the Tenno is perhaps their one true weakness, and that is compassion. Their innocence, while a gift, can also be a curse, especially when weighed within the nature of war. One such event would occur amidst the resulting turmoil of a power struggle brewing within the Corpus, a merchant cult built upon the tenets of one Parvos Granum. Granum was the son of a grain farmer for the Orichan society, and after enduring the treatment of what would amount to be a slave in the eyes of most, on one particular day, he visited one of their great cities and ripped a chunk of a highly valuable substance called rubido from one of their glistening walls. For this, he was both caught and punished by having his hand removed, but not before swallowing the gem in its entirety and tirelessly crawling his way home. Once there and finally recovered, he pawned it for an exorbitant amount of money, and instead of using it only for his personal gain, he instead found others with the same sense of tireless ambition. One he coined his desire and offered them resources to build their own wealth, acting like an overwhelmingly successful pyramid scheme, the nature of which is up to your own interpretation of such things. This group became the Corpus, and 14 of them, specifically with Granum at the helm, created the board of directors. Interestingly enough, though, at some point, one, or most likely a group of these men he had previously trusted, turned on him, attempting to assassinate him by utilizing a faulty Void translation
I live. Treachery seethed within the heart of the faith I had built when the board's assassins overloaded my transport's void drive. Protea, my beautiful Protea, and her gift for manipulating time preserved me.
And thus theoretically sending him to an uncharted section of the void, as first a prison, and then, eventually, a tomb. However, Granum was unusually prepared for such a thing, and the method by which is interesting to say the least.
At last, esteemed Parvos, tell me what you desire, and we shall furnish you.
My desire is well known to you. Assemble what I have designed, and I shall be on my way.
Potent weaponry, exquisite anatomy, those are trivial. But temporal manipulation, even the Entrati...
The Entrati have violated time, and I have violated them.
What shall we name her then? This child of two fathers.
Granum was, at some undetermined point, given a purpose-built Warframe with detailed specifications to his desires, named Protea, by the very people who had sliced off his hand so unceremoniously years earlier. And it's here that I wonder if the Orokin were even aware of this transaction. You see, all we really know here is that Ballas, the father of frames, would be the one to produce Protea for him, considered the frame of two fathers. And we also know of Ballas's defection, so one has to wonder if this wasn't just him further supplying Orokin enemies with the purpose of, well, let's say, chaos within the system, to further weaken the already taxed Golden Lords in their grip on the Origin system. Nonetheless, this frame and her temporal abilities, one specifically required by Granum himself, would allow for a kind of pocket of frozen time where he could theoretically live forever, or at least long enough to get someone to let him out.
By now your friends have noticed that the overloading void engines are preventing the exits you opened for my captives from closing. Well done, and goodbye.
Which in itself is very interesting. Did he somehow know this would occur? It's an oddly specific skill set to desire to commission, and while these abilities would have obvious benefits, I'd be remiss to say that I didn't see a bit of foresight within those decisions. Regardless, to everyone else in the Origin system, Parvos was dead, and was, by the knowledge of most, assassinated, leading to the desire for power, for greed, for control, that led Nathaniel into a deal with his own mother for information regarding his birthright. This information was most assuredly far more valuable than anticipated.
Like all of you, I was born full, with but a meager derivatives portfolio and limited vesting options. I never knew my parents. But, as an orphan, poor, as I said, I found great riches within the tenets of our glorious founder, Parvos Granum. The corpus became my family. But over the years, as our wealth blossomed and my humility grew vast, I began to see a certain similarity. I wondered, who am I really? After a protracted negotiation, my birth mother sold to me the secrets of my conception.
But in this instance, it would not be he who would ultimately come to profit from it. Further, the data alone would not be enough to sway a board of themselves power-hungry executives, but, at least in the mind of Anyo, perhaps an investigation of his death would provide something that would, and so he began to search for the body. He believed a scan of that would provide, perhaps through DNA or maybe even something he wasn't yet saying, the necessary aspect to allow him, in no certain terms, to become a kind of king of the corpus. providing the 15th vote and avoid stalling their society's progress any further. And it's the method by which he was doing this that brings us to the Tenno's part in all of it. Shortly after establishing a relationship with the people of Fortuna, they are tasked by the same crew, Utico, in the business to see what's happening to certain individuals within their group that are increasingly vanishing without a trace. And while investigating this, they witness firsthand what's actually going on. Anyo has figured out a way into these effigies of Granum's golden glove, the replacement for his severed hand, thought to be erected as a tribute or remembrance to their former leader, but in practice hide a much darker secret. They are in fact a kind of conduit to another plane of existence, holding not only the missing Solaris workers, but also the Warframe Protea and a very much alive Parvos Granum that would again lead us to question if any foresight was involved. And it would seem in some way the involvement of the Tenno sparked a kind of surge within Granum's frame, and finally gave him a reason to want to leave this place. Granum's Void. Although we know Protea in this place specifically to have been affected by a time dilation of sorts, the way he speaks of his solitude.
It has been so long since these old eyes beheld another living thing here in the sanctuary. I am Parvos Granum. Thank you for finding me.
As well as being aware of the events that occurred during however long this period actually was.
Father, permit me to show you all I have built in your name. To Nef Onyo that honor.
My name. I have watched you. Monuments to narcissism, demanding others sweat in your stead, gorging upon that which you have not earned. Watched as you claimed for yourself my teachings of self-reliance, perverting them into a flaccid philosophy of sloth, of idleness. Is that you, my son?
No, that must be a different son.
Suggests he both understands and experienced time pass, as well as potentially chose now to re-emerge, seeing our involvement as the catalyst to make his own move and reintroduce himself to our current time, something that seems to be happening a lot recently. What's more, he uses our involvement and Nef-Anyo's lack of vision to find a way out, and in the aftermath provides us with a very subtle foreshadowing of his intentions as to where the future of the corpus lies.
The system shall change. No more clutching at sunk costs, imposed ideals, hand-me-down hopes. No, we are better than that. Corpus shall know a violent restructuring, but with time enough to face the impending threat from Tau with renewed and absolute vigor. Or not. Perhaps the rot is too deep. Perhaps the father should abandon his children. Perhaps it is time for a new philosophy.
The impending threat from Tau is most likely associated with the sentient onslaught originally led by Era, one that culminated in the events portrayed in the New War, and it's important to note that Granum was completely absent during this time, most likely showing that he did in fact choose another path, as promised, one that becomes even more concerning when you consider his recent activity, directing his vessels to scour the newly emerged Zariman 10-0 for artifacts, doing the same thing with Albert Contratti's abandoned labs, and now, during Operation Belly of the Beast, stealing whatever remaining vestiges of the Jade Warframe and perhaps her progeny that continue to remain within the deepest parts of Uranus. Granum's interest seems very distinct.
Ordis will not stand idly by while Parvos Granum reaps the last vestiges of Jade for his Eximus Executioner program. He must be
harnessing the very raw and devastating power of the Jade Light, a device shown many times to be able to essentially disintegrate whatever it touches, even the Warframes themselves. An incredibly effective asset, succeeding where so many have failed, or if nothing else, have required much more to achieve. Traditionally, Corpus Doctrine would suggest these items would be cataloged and most likely auctioned off to the highest bidder, perfectly in line with the instituted commerce the corpus have made such a substantial part of their very being. But those tenets he originally established are maybe ones now that he has abandoned, or if nothing else, altered for a different purpose. During Dante Unbound, when he essentially enlisted us via Drusus Laverian to comb in Trotty's labs for items of exquisite renown, the only thing I personally wanted to tell Granum during that entire time was,
We ain't found shit!
However, in order to help Drusus, we keep looking, and let's just say we learn of a very inconvenient truth that Granum has at some point been made aware of the man on the wall. We can't be completely certain of the exact time or nature of this association yet, but there are a few telling signs that either he has made actual contact with this entity, or perhaps worse, has focused his gaze on the express purpose of doing just that. And it flies in the face of another of Entrati's assumptions about the man on the wall.
I never spoke of him, that man trapped in the wall. And while there have been countless souls who have followed me through with their light skippers and field wave skins and very-eyed instruments, not a single one ever saw him. Me.
Something I think he has potentially been guilty of in multiple instances in the past, most likely because he just doesn't understand the indifference as well as he believes. But it's telling that he would suppose himself to be the only one who ever had any contact with this entity, at least at the time of him writing these requiems. This feels like a tragic flaw we may come to see being exploited even more than what has already been shown, and potentially by the worst people.
Parvos Granum stole from the Entrati. He boasted of it. All that Albrecht had freely given, all he had sacrificed, was not enough. Can you blame me for despising the man?
Judging from what we're seeing now, one of those is Parvos Granum. It can't be understated how important the information we are given from Drusus once we are able to locate Dante's Prex card is, and bridges a gap that makes the future much more tenuous for the Tenno and their allies. At the same time, it forces us to reevaluate some of Granum's previous appearances. One in particular would be the ending of the Call of Tempestari, where it defeated Valaglarius, the same one observing Captain Zito's failed attempt at retrieving the remains of Jade, and as we find out during the events of Jade Shadows, the very first Warframe-born child is transported to the area the Tenno had earlier freed Parvos from, and a considerably different sounding Granum, different but far from unfamiliar, is offering his hand to her in an uncomfortably recognizable way.
Sister.
Time's up, kiddo. I can save them. All of them. But you have to want it. Let's say we shake on it.
It should be noted that prisoners rarely revisit their own prisons, and further, it may have been naive to ever believe that a man like Granum could be held within the very void itself, even a specific pocket sanctioned off by the time-manipulating powers of a Warframe, and not assume he would at some point have been visited by the indifference, either during or probably before. Maybe even offering him the very information he instructed Ballas with regarding Protea's creation. Top of all that, the man on the wall can do the time trick too, going pretty much wherever he feels he needs to, so even Protea's abilities would in theory not keep them out of the indifference's influence. Now, bear in mind the capacity by which the indifference can move through timelines is still pretty vague, so we don't really understand how he came to be with us during Whispers on the Walls, but if nothing else, his presence here proves he does have this ability. And I think it's also important to remember, Parvos is a businessman, and has every bit the visage of someone who makes deals with, let's say, questionable entities, if the return is satisfactory. That's a core principle of his character, himself becoming a man of value only due to theft in the first place. Was it justified? It's really of no consequence, because There was substantial risk involved, and he went through with it. That's what defines him, and this is what makes him so formidable at the moment. Granum, as far as we know, is the first potential dealmaker who both willingly made the deal and is not actively trying to stop the man on the wall, unless you consider Baroque Katir, and at least at this point, Katir seems to have no interest in anything besides finding and selling rare, artifacts. Well, that is awfully convenient, and may even describe why he too was visited. Regardless of that point, Katir does appear neutral. Entrati and the Tenno give the impression of being opposed, but Granum, well, one has to wonder to what level his desire and the difference's influence have any overlap, or worse, if they've never been anything but a different name. After all, it has so many. The indifference, the man on the wall, the lidless eye, the wall of bone. What's one more? And now, during the events of Operation Belly of the Beast, he desires 2 more ancient Orcan artifacts of extreme importance. The aforementioned Jade, and whatever remains of her light, using it to create the most deadly variant of Eximus ever produced. But maybe worse than that, he's trying to take Ortis.
You're Orden Carris. I'd recognize that voice anywhere. A hero to the Tenno, for he too slaughtered Oregon at a ceremony in his own honor. Does any memory of that valiant man still reside in your shallow, glassy brain?
Who has decided to helm the resistance to Granum's forced excavation of Jade's burial grounds. Or rather is attempting to, at first at least, coerce his buried former human mind, that of Orden Carris, to be free of the Orcan punishment of being a Cephalon and return to his former glory as a human, even offering him the means to do it.
Everything changes, little Cephalon, and yet nothing is forever lost. You could be a man again if you had the will. Consider.
And whereas Ortis seems pretty firm on the idea that he no longer has any interest in being that person anymore, Granum makes his intentions, the reason he seems so interested in Ortis in the first place, and all his obnoxious praise and consistent manipulation finally makes sense.
A man who has known starvation in his youth will never tolerate waste. Be warned, I will not let Jade's legacy be squandered, nor that of Orden Carris.
If Ortis will not join him willingly, perhaps Orden Carris, restored by force, as this statement insinuates, will. And it seems like he has every intention of finding out. The two did know of each other in the past, and while Ortis feels disgusted by Parvos at the moment, the fact that a man named the Beast of Bones was never given a reason and stayed his hand against Parvos Granum seems to imply that the two weren't at odds. So, would Orden turn on us? Those closest to the Tenno are now being targeted. First the Lotus, and now our ship Cephalon. That's aside from the fact that Granum also informs us that yes, he is aware of what happened to Jade.
You are industrious, Cephalon. I will give you that. But what was Jade to you that you would defy me to preserve her dusty remains? Is it merely the courteous regard of one killer for another, Orden Carris?
That a son, a Warframe son, has been born, confirming what I said in my last video, that this child will be hunted. Of course, Ortis does remind Parvos that
Continue this assault on Jade's legacy, and Orden is not the killer you will need to concern yourself with.
his actions too will in fact have their own consequences, and will most likely offer that final push the Stalker requires to ally with the Tenno on a permanent basis. You know, if you really think about it, The Corpus have pretty much always worshipped the man on the wall. The real question is, were they in their own minds worshipping a concept or an actual entity? And even if they did know, is their understanding of Corpus history and ideology as accurate as they think? As more of the Corpus founder's story is introduced, I do wonder if more connections to the Void entity will begin to appear. The idea that Parvos can understand and speak Void tongue, whereas Albert and Trotty cannot, is utterly baffling and too important to understate, as this would by definition mean Granum did not get this information from Entrotti's labs. So how then? This desire he speaks of, did Granum ever know or just shrug off voices in his head as part of his psyche and thus fail to understand even what he was dealing with?
In the worst times, it felt as though death would claim us before the day was through. It was on one such afternoon that I was fated to first hear that glorious sound. A whisper I strained to hear in a tongue not of man, but of something else, something grander, a language I understood instinctively, the language of desire.
Desire speaks in a different language, seeming very akin to another situation we've already been shown.
The Void had penetrated the bell. It was in there with us. Before it started talking, though, it made us smart enough to understand it.
With the caveat given the ability to understand him. And it really makes one wonder if the actual language of desire isn't Void tongue, something he is just able to understand, something both the Tenno and Entrotti do not. Even though this is speculation, if somehow it's accurate, would actually have the meeting in no uncertain terms prior to his so-called imprisonment with the Granum Void. How long was that? And does it make this time in the Void even more concerning? Further, why did he decide to go back to a prison he was so powerless to leave for such a long time? I'm not sure what's worse, the answer to that question, or that this is potentially his doppelganger, providing insight into Granum's most renowned achievement, Spectre particle technology.
I am calling it the Spectre particle. As my Archimedeans explained, mimicry is in its nature. An echo, exposed to precept circuits, we are able to imprint behaviors, like an infant mirroring her surrogate. Only this infant can set the world on fire.
Mimicry of literally anything, as we've seen the Spectres inhabit multiple forms. Like the specifications provided for Protea, could this information too have been passed through what I've described as a kind of corrupted universal consciousness, appearing to some potentially without the same need for technology like what Entrotti utilized? Like, is it possible some are actually sensitive to the indifference's frequencies and are more easily communicated with, like a perversion on the concept of God and engaging in a personal dialogue, or worse? Do we just have an unchecked entity roaming through the origin system, not really needing some connection to visit, unleashed by Entrotti's very first encounter? I guess what I'm saying is one may not need a void jump accident or introduction to a new plane of reality to call him. That may only be how we were introduced. Others, especially those it deems worthy, may have come to know him through different means, and if so, something I believe the ending of Whispers in the Walls make very possible is the idea that these doppelgangers may have their own specific personalities, not necessarily being parts of a whole, but rather corrupted copies of the person they encounter, taking on that subject's personality in the process as well as their appearance. Does that mean that the entity we see and have spoken to on numerous occasions is somehow different than his Vitruvian form, and worse, does that potentially mean that each of these entities, the trickster child, the corrupted scientist, a warped businessman? Like the black-eyed children described in Duviri,
they joined the others for class, sitting at the back, silent and attentive. Their eyes were a deep and lustrous black, their mouths fixed in a constant grin. None of the sages saw them enter or leave. The Hollow Children did not speak, nor did they participate in class in any way, except to giggle unnervingly when the subject of the Void was mentioned. When adults came to collect their children, they noticed an additional oddity. Among the Hollow Children were exact duplicates of themselves when they were younger. Each day, there were more of them.
Are their own little chaos demons, something that may have been confirmed by said ending of Whispers in the Walls and the presence of both our doppelganger and Entrades standing next to each other. Would it really surprise anyone to see these two accompanied by more in the future? Baroque-Katir and Archimedean Yonta for certain, but the Lotus? Parvos Granum? Even Ballas? Who would you say might be in that family portrait of sorts? This also puts an interesting twist on Parvos' original message to us.
Life's just a bargain like any other. Yours is no different. Would you like a seat at my new table? Perhaps with your masked friends alongside? The business, was it? A curious name. And Unico, of course. All people who know what they want. I know what they want. But what about you? Tell me, friend. What is it you desire?
As it sure does sound like he's offering us a deal here, does it not? And it wasn't just to us, now was it? Naming both Unico and the business in his offer. Further, we've now seen a specific message called to the Tenno in two different instances, and one of the Deviri tablets shows the mask beginning to slip a little bit, revealing that same phrase again, Mara Loke, something Tagfer calls us as well before we are gifted with the ability to understand them. And I think it's important to make that distinction because even though we are able to easily communicate with them after building the effigy per Entrades' instructions, we still don't know what this phrase means, although it's undoubtedly something of importance due to its continued reappearance, and even stranger, that subtitles exist showing the exact words in Whispers in the Walls, while curiously aren't present at any other time when he speaks in this language. And remember, he appears to be able to speak in a language both we and Lloyd can understand earlier in this kind of groan.
Look at these things lying around, abandoned.
One in which physical manifestations of literally exist, the Voca we find and collect during missions. So with these words seeming to hold such power and value, what is the true significance of this line? I've postulated myself that Mara Loke means Child of the Void, but that's only going off context clues of the Loke Requiem and the words Entrade is associated with them. What does he truly understand, though? Did he give these words their meaning? And if not, are the transcriptions all accurate? And lastly, if this message isn't something on the lines of, "We had a deal and you still owe me, my child," why does he choose to hide the meaning of these words in particular when by all rights he could just tell us in a manner that we could understand, be it in our orbiter or within the walls of Entrades' labs? Given how important this appears to be, would it be out of the question for the Tenno, now understanding Parvos to be the only person in potentially the entirety of the Origin system who could translate this, to act on Parvos' deal, if for no other reason than to uncover what it was that was said? And would this, in your opinion, be a deal the Tenno should in fact entertain, given what we now know? What if within that information lay the very method by which the Tenno would be able to stop the Man of the Wall, ensuring continuing stability in a safe, secure society? With that being said, I hope you all enjoyed today's video and it got you thinking about the future of Warframe and what role Granum will come to play, and further what exactly his new philosophy entails. If the entity we saved, or if nothing else the one who escaped, if that description is too close to the chest, is even Granum. So, who knows who really sent us this message? Do I believe it to be Granum? Yes, at the moment I do, but I think it's easy to see how at this point we really can't be certain anyone is who they say they are. Mimicry has become quite the problem recently, and may finally show us why the Orkin were so vehemently opposed to the idea of twins within their society. At any rate, I hope you all have a wonderful day today, a wonderful rest of your week, and I'll talk at you all in the next one. Take care, everybody. Bye.